Picture this. A small town. You know, the kind where life moves kind of slow and everyone knows each other?
Oh, yeah.
And the most exciting thing happening is maybe the upcoming bake sale.
Yeah, I gotcha.
Now imagine that peacefulness just shattered by something you never thought could happen. And that's what happened in Wampum, Pennsylvania,
Wow.
back in 2009. It was a February morning, cold, when the unthinkable happened.
Okay.
A young woman, Kenzie Houk, was found murdered. And it gets even more shocking. The main suspect was only a boy,
Oh, my gosh.
11-year-old Jordan Brown. He was accused of killing his father's fiancée, who was also pregnant.
It's that case that kind of grabs you right away, doesn't it? This jarring contrast. You have this young boy in this brutal act. It just raises so many questions, like about childhood and, about guilt and even about justice, the very nature of it.
It really does. Welcome to CrimePod Castle's Twisted Crime series. Today we're going deep, doing a deep dive into the Jordan Brown case. This case really divided the nation. It had so many debates about the justice system and childhood and what is reasonable doubt really.
Right.
So we're going to examine everything. The events, the evidence, and what happened afterward, and how it went far beyond that town. So let's start at the beginning. Who were Jordan Brown and Kenzie Houk?
Well, Jordan Brown, he was only 11 at the time, as you said. And from what I've read, people described him as a pretty typical kid, liked sports, being outside. Nothing really that made him stand out.
Right.
And then there was Kenzie Houk. She was a young woman, only 26. But she was already a mother to 2 little girls, and she was so excited to have a baby boy with Jordan's father.
Oh, wow.
It's almost hard to think about, They're getting ready for this new life, their family is growing, and then it's all just taken away.
It's such a stark contrast, isn't it? This innocent child and this happy mom-to-be, and then this horrible act of violence.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the crime. Can you walk us through what happened that morning?
Well, it all happened in Kenzie's bedroom. She was found in her bed, shot from close range. Just the brutality of it, the fact that she was pregnant, it shook that whole town to its core. And to make it even more tragic, it was Kenzie's own 4-year-old daughter who found her.
Wow.
Janessa, that was her name. She found her mom's body and told the adults. Can you imagine what that must have been like for a child that young, to see something so horrible?
I can't even begin to imagine that detail really stays with you. This innocent child finding her mother like that.
Yeah.
So the police are called. And they're under a lot of pressure to find answers, of course. So how did they end up focusing on Jordan? He seems like an unlikely suspect.
Yeah, an 11-year-old isn't usually the first person you think of in a murder case.
Right.
But there were some things that made the investigators look at him. Like the murder weapon, it turned out to be a youth model shotgun, the kind made for kids. And it had been given to Jordan as a gift.
Okay.
And then they did forensic tests, and they confirmed that the gun had been fired recently.
So the gun was a gift for Jordan and was used in the crime. Was there anything else that directly linked him to the scene?
See, that's where things get a little more complicated.
Bro.
They couldn't find any physical evidence at the crime scene that tied Jordan to the murder, like no fingerprints or DNA. But they did rely heavily on what little Janessa told them. She said she saw Jordan with the shotgun that morning, and that she heard a bang before he left for school.
But wouldn't a defense attorney question how reliable a 4-year-old statement is, especially after what she had just been through?
Oh, absolutely. And that's something we'll talk about more when we get into the legal stuff. But at that point in the investigation, the pressure was on, and they didn't have any other strong leads. So the focus really shifted to Jordan.
So basically, based on a gun that was a gift and what a young child said, Jordan, at 11 years old, became the prime suspect in a murder case. It's hard to grasp, isn't it? That kind of accusation and what it means for a child that young. It's a lot to think about. And we'll keep talking about it right after this. We were talking about Jordan Brown. This 11-year-old facing an accusation you can't even imagine, accused of murdering his soon-to-be stepmom. And as we dig deeper into this whole thing, we hit this decision that really made things even more controversial.
You're talking about how they decided to try him as an adult.
Exactly. It wasn't just about questioning a child. He was going to face the whole adult justice system. So what led them to that decision?
Well, you got to remember, Pennsylvania's like a lot of states. They have laws that say juveniles can be tried as adults in some cases, especially when it's something serious like murder.
Right.
The prosecution argued that this crime was so bad it didn't matter how old Jordan was. They said someone who could do something that brutal was a danger no matter their age, and they said he deserved to be punished like an adult.
But wouldn't people worry about treating a child like an adult in court? I mean, they're still developing emotionally and mentally.
Oh, of course. That was the big argument against trying Jordan as an adult. People said the juvenile justice system is there for a reason. It's supposed to focus on rehabilitation,
Right.
because young people are still growing and changing. Their brains aren't fully developed. They might not even get the consequences of their actions. So they said Jordan deserved a chance to get help, to understand what he'd done and hopefully turn his life around.
So it was like these two totally different views going head to head. One side saying punish him, hold him responsible, and the other side saying he's a kid, he needs help, give him a chance.
Mm.
What impact did all this have outside the courtroom?
This case, it became like this big flashpoint in the whole national debate about juvenile justice.
Wow.
You had all these legal experts chiming in, child psychologists giving their opinions, and the public, they were divided. Some people were adamant that if you take a life, you face the consequences no matter your age, and then there were others who were just as strong in their belief that kids are different. Even in these extreme situations, they should be treated differently. It should be about helping them, not just punishing them.
It really shows you how complicated the justice system is, doesn't it?
Yeah.
This balancing act between punishment and rehabilitation, especially when you're talking about a child. It's a huge responsibility. So let's go inside the courtroom now.
Mm.
Can you give us a sense of what the trial was like?
Oh, man, that trial was tense. You can just imagine.
Yeah.
The prosecution, they laid out their case. It was all based on that circumstantial evidence we talked about, the gun that belonged to Jordan, what little Genesis said, and this idea that Jordan was jealous and resentful about the new baby coming.
Right.
But the defense, they fought hard. They kept pointing out that there was no physical proof connecting Jordan to the murder, and they questioned whether a little kid's words could be trusted, especially after something so traumatic. They even suggested that the investigators were so focused on closing the case fast, they didn't really look at other possibilities, other suspects.
So the defense was trying to show that the prosecution's case wasn't solid enough,
Ugh.
highlighting that lack of hard evidence and suggesting that maybe other leads were missed.
Yeah, exactly.
But in the end, what was the outcome?
Even with the defense doing everything they could, the jury decided Jordan Brown was guilty of first-degree murder.
Wow.
And he was sentenced to juvenile detention until he turned 21.
Despite there being no direct evidence, and the defense really challenging the prosecution's story, they still found this child guilty of murder. How did people react to that verdict?
Oh, there were mixed reactions, just like you'd expect. Some people felt like justice had been served. Someone was being held accountable for Kenzie's death. But there were others who were really worried. They felt like the verdict wasn't strong enough, like it was based too much on things that weren't clear-cut, and on a child's testimony after a traumatic event.
It seems like a decision that brings up more questions than it answers.
Uh.
Could a child really have done something so terrible? Were there other possibilities that they never looked into? And what about Jordan? He was now facing years locked up.
And those questions, they didn't just go away. They ended up leading to another twist in this already messy case.
So we're at this point where an 11-year-old boy has been found guilty of murder and he's sentenced to juvenile detention. But like we've seen with the Jordan Brown case, there's always more to the story.
It's what makes this whole case so fascinating. It went way beyond just the trial and the verdict. It started this whole debate trying to understand how a child could do something so violent and what that means for how we see childhood and justice and what's enough to prove someone's guilty.
Right, and that debate didn't stop even after Jordan was locked up. His legal team kept fighting for him, didn't they?
Absolutely. They never gave up on him. They truly believed he was innocent, and they were determined to find the truth. So they started appealing, going over all the evidence and everything that happened in the trial, looking for any little thing that could change things.
So they were looking for anything that could cast doubt on the verdict. Any mistakes, anything that was missed. It's a long shot, though, right? Trying to overturn a murder conviction.
Oh, yeah. Appeals hardly ever work, especially in big cases like this. But Jordan's lawyers, they didn't give up, and they started focusing on one big thing. The fact that there was no direct physical evidence.
So they were going back to that basic question. If there was no DNA, no fingerprints, nothing clearly putting Jordan at the scene, was all that other evidence enough to say he was guilty without a doubt?
Exactly. And that argument, it started to gain some ground. Years after the trial, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court said they would hear Jordan's appeal.
That must have been huge for his lawyers, for Jordan, for anyone who thought he was wrongly convicted. What happened when the case went to the Supreme Court?
That was the turning point. The Supreme Court really looked at everything, the evidence, the trial, what both sides were saying. And in the end, their decision shocked everyone. They overturned Jordan's conviction.
They overturned it. After all that time, all those legal battles, why did they do that?
The justices, they basically agreed with what Jordan's lawyers had been saying all along. They said the evidence from the trial wasn't strong enough to prove he was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. They said the prosecution's case relied too much on things that weren't clear-cut. Like
So
that circumstantial evidence and what a little kid said, and this whole idea about Jordan being jealous, which they never really proved.
So after years of fighting, Jordan Brown's name was cleared. They wiped his record clean. It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
It really is. It shows how important due process is, you know? Having a system where you can appeal, where someone can take another look when there are doubts, and it shows the dedication of those who fight for justice, even when it seems impossible.
It's a big win for Jordan and everyone who supported him. But we can't forget that this case wasn't just about him. There's another family whose lives were changed forever by what happened.
You're right, Kenzie Houk's family. That decision must have brought up so much for them. Grief over losing her, anger that the person they thought was responsible was now free, and maybe even more uncertainty, knowing that they still don't know for sure who killed Kenzie.
It makes you realize that even when the legal system comes to a decision, the emotional impact, the search for answers, it can go on for years, maybe even forever. So where does that leave the investigation into Kenzie's murder? Did they reopen the case?
As of right now, they still haven't solved Kenzie Houk's murder. Just because they overturned Jordan's conviction doesn't mean they have another suspect. But it does mean they're basically back at square one.
So this deep dive into the Jordan Brown case leaves us with a lot to think about. A young life that was turned upside down, a family that was broken, a community dealing with this horrific crime, and a legal battle that became a national conversation. What are your final thoughts on all this? What do you hope people take away from it?
This case, it really shows how complicated our justice system is, how hard it is to weigh evidence and see the human cost of these tragedies. It makes us think about what justice really means, how we balance punishment and giving people second chances, and how we make sure that finding the truth is the most important thing in our legal system.
That's a powerful way to put it. And for everyone listening, if you found this deep dive into the Jordan Brown case interesting, make sure you follow CrimePod Castle and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We've got more in-depth looks at fascinating true crime cases coming soon. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and always keep thinking critically.